The champagne glass trembled in her hand as their eyes locked across the Manhattan penthouse. She didn't know his name. He didn't ask for hers. One night, one choice, one mistake that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her carefully ordered life. Because when Tiffany walked into Sterling Global's glass tower on Monday morning, ready to prove herself in her dream job, she never imagined the man waiting in the corner office, the man who now held her career, her reputation, and her treacherous heart in his powerful hands, was the same man whose touch still burned on her skin from 3 nights before. The Venetian mask felt heavier than it should have, delicate gold filigree and midnight blue feathers that brushed against Tiffany's temples with each movement. She stood at the edge of the Roosevelt Hotel's grand ballroom, champagne flute catching the light from a dozen crystal chandeliers, and wondered for the 100th time why she'd let her best friend Simone convince her to attend this masquerade charity gala. "Because you need to live a little," Simone had insisted, fastening the mask's silk ribbons behind Tiffany's head just hours earlier. "Because you've spent the last 3 years buried in business school and internships. Because you start your dream job at Sterling Global on Monday, and this is your last weekend to be nobody in particular. Nobody in particular." The words echoed now as Tiffany watched Manhattan's elite swirl around her in their designer gowns and expensive masks, playing at anonymity while their wealth and power radiated from every practiced gesture. She didn't belong here, not really. Her emerald dress was rented, her mask borrowed, her invitation secured through Simone's connection to the event planner. But something about the anonymity felt liberating. Behind the mask, she wasn't Tiffany Marshall, the girl from Brooklyn who'd fought for every scholarship and opportunity. She was just a woman in green, standing at the threshold of something she couldn't name. That's when she felt it, the weight of someone's gaze, steady and unwavering. She turned slowly, scanning the crowd, and found him. Across the ballroom, through the sea of masked faces and swirling champagne, a man stood watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His mask was simpler than most. Black leather, elegant lines, covering just enough to maintain the evening's illusion while revealing a strong jaw, olive skin, and lips that curved into something between a smile and a challenge. He was tall, she noticed as he began moving toward her, cutting through the crowd with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His tuxedo fit like it had been created specifically for his broad shoulders and lean frame. Dark hair, slightly tousled in a way that suggested expensive styling, made to look effortless, but it was his eyes, visible through the mask's openings, that held her captive. Grey, like storm clouds over steel, and focused entirely on her. Tiffany's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. She should look away, return her attention to the silent auction items displayed along the room's perimeter, pretend she hadn't noticed him noticing her. That's what the sensible version of herself, the one who'd be sitting in Sterling Global's offices in 48 hours, would do. But Simone's words whispered through her mind, "Your last weekend to be nobody in particular." So she didn't look away. She held his gaze as he approached, her heart drumming a rhythm she felt in her throat, her wrists, the small of her back. "You've been standing alone for 23 minutes, he said when he reached her, his voice low and smooth, with the kind of educated accent that suggested boarding schools and summer homes in the Hamptons. "I counted. You've been watching me for 23 minutes. Tiffany raised an eyebrow behind her mask, surprising herself with her boldness. "That's either very flattering or slightly concerning." His laugh was genuine, warm. "Fair point. Let me rephrase. I noticed you 23 minutes ago, and I've been trying to work up the courage to approach you ever since. You don't strike me as someone who needs to work up courage for anything. You'd be surprised what intimidates me." His eyes traveled over her face, what he could see of it, with an appreciation that felt different from the objectifying stares she'd sometimes endured. This felt like he was trying to memorize her, to understand something essential. "Would you like to dance, or would you prefer to continue our philosophical discussion about observation and intention?" "What's your name?" Tiffany asked, though the question violated the evening's unspoken rule. The masks were meant to preserve mystery, to allow people to interact without the burden of identity and expectation. "Does it matter?" He extended his hand, palm up, an invitation. "Tonight, I'm just a man in a mask, asking a stunning woman in green if she'd like to dance." Tiffany hesitated for only a moment before placing her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, strong, deliberate, and electricity shot up her arm, settling somewhere deep in her chest. The orchestra was playing something classical and sweeping as he led her onto the dance floor. His hand found the small of her back, and they began to move, perfectly synchronized, despite never having danced together before. He led with confidence, but not dominance, creating a partnership in their movement that felt both exhilarating and oddly natural. "You're not from this world," he said, after they'd completed a full rotation around the floor. It wasn't a question. "What makes you say that?" "The way you observe everything. The slight tension in your shoulders, like you're ready to fight or flee at any moment. The fact that you've touched your mask 4 times since we started dancing, as if you're reminding yourself it's there, protecting you." Tiffany stopped adjusting her mask. "Maybe I'm just careful." "Careful is good. Careful means you've had to be." His grey eyes softened slightly. "But tonight isn't about being careful, is it? Tonight is about being someone else for a few hours." "And who are you being tonight?" she challenged. "Someone who can admit he's drawn to a woman he just met. Someone who doesn't have to calculate every word and every action based on how it might affect quarterly earnings or board opinions." His hand pressed slightly more firmly against her back. "Someone who can just feel." The music swelled around them, and Tiffany realized they'd stopped moving, standing still in the center of the dance floor, while other couples flowed around them like water around stones. The ballroom, the chandeliers, the hundreds of masked guests, all of it faded until there was only him, only this moment, only the question burning in his eyes that she knew was reflected in her own. "I don't do this," she whispered. I'm not." "I know." His thumb traced a small circle on her back, the touch searing through the thin silk of her dress. "Neither do I." "Then why does this feel inevitable?" His smile was slow, devastating. "Maybe because some things are." They left the ballroom without discussing it, without planning it. One moment they were dancing, drowning in the weight of their mutual attraction, and the next, his hand was in hers as he guided her through a side door, down a corridor lined with gilded mirrors, toward the hotel's private elevator reserved for penthouse guests. "I'm staying here tonight," he explained, pressing the button for the 42nd floor. "Top floor. If you'd rather go back to the gala." Tiffany silenced him by pulling his face down to hers, their masks bumping awkwardly before he reached up and carefully removed hers, then his own. She got her first unobstructed view of his face, sharp cheekbones, strong nose, those impossibly grey eyes now darkened with desire, before his mouth found hers and thought became impossible. The kiss was everything and nothing like she'd imagined, demanding but not aggressive, passionate but not clumsy. He kissed like he danced, like he moved through the world, with confidence and skill and a deep attention to her responses, adjusting to what made her gasp, what made her press closer, what made her forget every reason this was a terrible idea. The elevator doors opened onto a private foyer, marble floors, a single door, the kind of accommodation that cost more per night than Tiffany's monthly rent. He fumbled with the keycard, and she noticed his hands weren't quite steady, which somehow made this more real, more honest. Inside, floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan spread out below them, a carpet of light stretching toward distant horizons. The suite was all modern elegance, cream leather, dark wood, abstract art that probably cost more than her education. "We don't have to," he started, but Tiffany was already reaching for him, pulling him close, tired of thinking, tired of being careful, tired of always making the sensible choice. "No names," she breathed against his mouth. "No explanations. Just tonight." "Just tonight," he agreed. And then there were no more words, only hands and mouths, and the discovery of what two strangers could create when they stopped pretending to be anything other than two people who wanted each other with an intensity that defied logic. Morning arrived with brutal sunshine streaming through the uncurtained windows. Tiffany woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling, the expensive sheets, the warm male body curved around hers. Reality crashed down like a bucket of ice water. She'd slept with a stranger, a man whose name she didn't know, whose life she knew nothing about, a man who touched her with such reverence and hunger that even now, 12 hours later, her skin remembered the exact path of his fingers. Carefully, she extracted herself from his embrace. He murmured something in his sleep, but didn't wake. In the grey morning light, he looked younger, vulnerable, with his dark hair messy against the white pillow and his face relaxed in sleep. Beautiful, she thought, then immediately pushed the observation away. This wasn't beautiful. This was a mistake, no matter how incredible it had felt at the time. Tiffany gathered her dress, her borrowed mask, her shoes. The emerald silk was wrinkled beyond redemption, a physical testament to what they'd done. She dressed quickly, quietly, her hands shaking as she fastened the back zipper. On the nightstand, she saw his wallet, and next to it, a business card case. She shouldn't look. Looking violated the terms of their anonymous encounter. But something made her reach for the case, flip it open, read the name embossed on the heavy cardstock. Nicholas Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Global Enterprises. The card slipped from her fingers. No, 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 no. Sterling Global. Where she was supposed to start work on Monday morning. Where she'd accepted a junior analyst position in the corporate development division. Where she'd be working in the same building, on the same floor, in the same... Oh, God. Nicholas Sterling wasn't just her new boss. He was the boss, the founder and CEO of a multinational conglomerate worth billions. The man whose photograph hung in Sterling Global's lobby, whose reputation for ruthless business acumen and brilliant strategic thinking had made him a legend before his 35th birthday. The man whose bed she'd just spent the night in. Tiffany grabbed her clutch and ran, not caring about the noise, not caring about anything except getting out of that penthouse before he woke up and recognized her. Though how would he recognize her? They'd never met before last night. He had no idea who she was, where she worked, what massive complication she represented, unless he'd planned this, unless he'd known exactly who she was, and this had been some kind of twisted power play. No. She'd seen his face when they'd kissed in that elevator. Whatever this had been, it hadn't been calculated. She made it to the street, flagged down a taxi, gave her Brooklyn address in a voice that didn't sound like her own. Through the cab's window, she watched Manhattan slide past, the city that had promised her everything, that had given her a degree and an opportunity and one perfect, impossible night that might have just destroyed her career before it even began. Her phone buzzed. "Simone, how was the gala? Did you meet anyone interesting?" Tiffany stared at the message, at the innocent emoji, at the question that she couldn't begin to answer honestly. "It was fine," she typed back. "I'm home now. Talk later." She spent the rest of Saturday and all of Sunday in her apartment, ignoring Simone's increasingly concerned calls, trying to formulate a plan. She could quit before she started. She could show up Monday and pretend it never happened. She could... What? There was no guidebook for this situation, no protocol for "I accidentally slept with my CEO at an anonymous masquerade ball." By Monday morning, she'd convinced herself that maybe he wouldn't remember her. They'd been drinking. The masks had concealed most of their faces. Manhattan was huge. The odds of crossing paths in Sterling Global's sprawling headquarters were minimal. She could survive this. She had to survive this. Tiffany dressed in her most professional outfit, a navy suit that she'd saved for months to buy, a cream blouse, modest heels. She pulled her natural hair back into a sleek bun, applied minimal makeup, and stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was polished, professional, ready for her first day at one of the world's most prestigious companies. She looked nothing like the woman in the emerald dress and golden mask. She could do this. Sterling Global's headquarters occupied a gleaming tower in Midtown, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. Tiffany joined the stream of employees flowing through the revolving doors, her new ID badge feeling heavy around her neck. The lobby was everything she'd imagined: soaring ceilings, the company's logo in brushed steel letters, and yes, a massive photograph of Nicholas Sterling himself, looking commanding and distant in a charcoal suit. She forced herself not to stare at the photo, not to remember how that same face had looked when he'd... Tiffany Marshall. She turned to find a woman in her early 40s approaching, hand extended. "I'm Vivian Chen, Director of Corporate Development. Welcome to Sterling Global." "Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Let me show you to your desk. We've got a full morning planned. Orientation, system access, team introductions." Vivienne led her toward the elevators, chatting about the company culture and exciting projects on the horizon. They rode up to the 38th floor, emerging into an open-plan office space with dramatic views of the city. Modern workstations lined the perimeter, while glass-walled conference rooms occupied the interior. Professional, sleek, intimidating. "You'll be working primarily with our M&A team," Vivian explained, guiding her past clusters of employees who glanced up with polite interest. "We're in the middle of analyzing a potential acquisition in the tech sector, so you'll be diving in immediately. I hope you're ready for—" She stopped abruptly. Tiffany followed her gaze and felt her stomach drop through the floor. Nicholas Sterling stood near one of the conference rooms, deep in conversation with two senior executives. He was wearing a dark grey suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary, his hair styled perfectly, his posture radiating authority. He looked every inch the powerful CEO, nothing like the vulnerable man she'd left sleeping in that penthouse bed. As if sensing their presence, he glanced up. Their eyes met. For 3 seconds, 3 eternal, devastating seconds, his expression showed nothing but polite professional interest. Then recognition dawned, flickering across his face like lightning before he caught himself, schooled his features back into neutrality. But Tiffany had seen it. The shock, the realization, the same horror currently freezing her own blood. "Mr. Sterling," Vivian called out, oblivious to the seismic shift happening in the air between her new employee and her CEO. "I'd like to introduce our newest team member. This is Tiffany Marshall, starting today as a junior analyst." Nicholas Sterling walked toward them with measured steps, his face now an unreadable mask, more effective than anything they'd worn Saturday night. He extended his hand, and Tiffany had no choice but to take it. His grip was firm, professional, brief. But in that moment of contact, she felt the tremor running through him, felt the electric recognition that mirrored her own. "Welcome to Sterling Global, Ms. Marshall." His voice was perfectly controlled, perfectly neutral. Only she could hear the slight roughness underneath, the barely perceptible catch on her name. "I hope you'll find your time here rewarding." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." Her own voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "I'm honored to be here." His grey eyes held hers for one moment longer than necessary. In their depths, she saw questions, complications, and something that looked dangerously close to desire. Then he released her hand and turned back to his executives, dismissing her with the kind of practiced ease that came from years of corporate command. "Impressive, isn't he?" Vivian murmured as they continued toward Tiffany's designated desk. "Mr. Sterling is very hands-on with new initiatives. You'll probably interact with him more than you'd expect for someone at your level." Tiffany managed a noise that might have been agreement, while her mind raced through 1,000 implications, 1,000 complications, 1,000 ways this perfect job had just become infinitely more complex. Her new desk overlooked the city, the same city that had glittered below them Saturday night when she couldn't think about that, wouldn't think about that. This was her dream job. She'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let one night derail everything. It was just physical attraction. They were both adults. They could be professional. Except when she finally risked a glance back toward the conference room, she found Nicholas Sterling standing at the glass wall. His executives departed, his attention fixed entirely on her, with an intensity that made her skin flush despite the office's careful climate control. And Tiffany knew, with the kind of certainty that settled in her bones, that nothing about this situation was going to be simple, professional, or easily forgotten. The man who'd touched her with such desperate hunger, who'd whispered her beauty against her skin, who'd looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, that man wasn't going to conveniently disappear just because they were now boss and employee. Which meant Tiffany Marshall's carefully planned career path had just become infinitely more complicated, and somewhere beneath the panic and the professionalism, beneath every logical reason this was a disaster, her treacherous heart was already remembering the way he'd held her, the way he'd made her feel, the way one impossible night had shown her a version of herself she'd never known existed. She opened her laptop, pulled up the orientation materials, and tried to focus on anything except the weight of his gaze burning through 30 feet of corporate office space. It was going to be a very long first day. The first week at Sterling Global passed in a haze of orientation sessions, system training, and elaborate pretense. Tiffany threw herself into learning the company's portfolio, its acquisition strategies, its competitive position in the market. She arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for additional projects. If Vivian or her other colleagues noticed her excessive enthusiasm, they attributed it to typical new employee eagerness. None of them knew the real reason. Staying busy meant fewer opportunities to accidentally encounter Nicholas Sterling in hallways or elevators or conference rooms, fewer chances for their eyes to meet and betray everything they were both working so hard to forget. Except forgetting proved impossible. She'd catch glimpses of him, walking past her floor, visible through the glass walls of executive meetings, standing at the windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor. Each sighting sent adrenaline flooding through her system, her body remembering what her mind was trying desperately to suppress. And worse, far worse, were the moments when she'd look up from her computer to find him watching her from across the office space, his expression unreadable, but his attention unmistakable. Those moments lasted only seconds before he'd turn away, but they left her shaken, her concentration destroyed, her professional composure cracking at the edges. "You're doing excellent work," Vivian told her Friday afternoon, reviewing the competitive analysis Tiffany had prepared for the potential tech acquisition. "Thorough, insightful, well-structured. I'm impressed. Thank you." Tiffany tried to feel pride in the compliment, but mostly she felt exhausted from maintaining constant vigilance, from the effort of appearing normal when everything felt fractured. "In fact, your work caught Mr. Sterling's attention." Vivienne smiled, oblivious to how those words made Tiffany's pulse spike. He specifically asked to see your report. That's unusual for someone at your level. You should feel very proud. Proud. Yes. That's definitely what she felt, and not at all like she might throw up. He'd like to meet with you Monday morning, Vivienne continued. 9 o'clock. His office. Just a brief conversation about your analysis, I'm sure. Consider it a compliment. Mr. Sterling doesn't waste time on work that doesn't interest him. After Vivienne left, Tiffany sat frozen at her desk, staring at her carefully crafted report without seeing it. A meeting. Alone. In his office. Every instinct screamed at her to find an excuse, to be sick Monday morning, to do anything except walk into that office and face him without witnesses, without the protective shield of corporate activity around them. But refusing would raise questions. Running would make everything worse. She had to face him eventually. Might as well be on Monday. The weekend crawled past with agonizing slowness. Simone tried to drag her out Saturday night. You've been weird all week, girl. We need to get you out of your head. But Tiffany claimed exhaustion from her intense first week. Not a lie exactly, but not the whole truth either. She still hadn't told Simone about the gala, about him. The words stuck in her throat every time she tried. Remember that masquerade you convinced me to attend? Well, I slept with my CEO, and now my entire life is a disaster. Sunday night, she stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes, agonizing over what to wear. Too professional, and she looked like she was trying too hard, too fashionable, and it might remind him of the emerald dress. She finally settled on charcoal grey trousers and a burgundy blouse, attractive but not provocative, professional but not severe. She barely slept. Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of a tidal wave. Tiffany went through her routine on autopilot, shower, makeup, coffee she couldn't taste. On the subway she rehearsed what she'd say, keep it professional. Focus on the work, don't mention anything personal. Absolutely don't think about how his hands felt on your skin, or how he'd looked at you like you were something precious, something worth savouring. She arrived at Sterling Global at 8:30, giving herself time to prepare. At 8:55, she stepped into the executive elevator, her printed report clutched in slightly damp hands. The 42nd floor was different from her own, quieter, more exclusive, with thick carpeting that absorbed sound and original artwork on the walls. Nicholas Sterling's corner office occupied the prime real estate, naturally. His assistant, a polished woman in her 50s named Margaret, greeted her with professional warmth. Miss Marshall, yes. Mr. Sterling is expecting you. Please go right in. The door was already open. Nicholas Sterling's office was exactly what she'd expected. Massive windows on 2 walls offering panoramic city views, a sitting area with leather furniture, bookcases filled with business tomes, and what looked like first editions of literary classics. His desk was dark wood, probably mahogany, with a sleek computer setup and neat stacks of documents that suggested organized efficiency. He stood at the windows, hands in his pockets, his suit jacket hanging on a nearby chair. In shirt sleeves and a silver tie, he looked simultaneously more casual and somehow more dangerous. She could see the muscles of his back shift under the fine cotton as he turned at her entrance. Tiffany. Not Ms. Marshall. Just her first name, spoken in that voice that had murmured against her ear Saturday night, that had said her name like a prayer and a plea. Mr. Sterling. She stayed near the door, maintaining distance. You wanted to discuss my report? Close the door. Her hand hesitated on the handle. I'm not sure that's... Close the door, Tiffany. We need to talk. And I'd prefer not to have this conversation where my entire executive team can witness it. She closed the door. The silence that followed felt heavy, charged with everything they'd been avoiding for a week. He crossed to his desk, but didn't sit. Instead, leaning against it, arms folded, studying her with an intensity that made her skin flush. "Your analysis was excellent," he said finally. Genuinely insightful. Vivian was right to be impressed. "Thank you. That's not why you're here." Tiffany's fingers tightened on the report. "Then why am I here?" "Because we can't keep pretending nothing happened." He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its perfect styling. "Because every time I see you on that floor, every time you look at me like I'm some kind of threat, it becomes more obvious that something is very wrong. And in this environment, obvious problems become everyone's business. I don't look at you like you're a threat." His eyebrow rose. "You look at me like you're calculating the fastest escape route, which, given the circumstances, is understandable, but not sustainable. What do you want me to do?" The words came out sharper than intended. "Pretend that night never happened? Because that's what I've been trying to do. But it's difficult when you keep watching me like—" She stopped, swallowed. "We need to maintain professional boundaries." "I agree." He pushed off the desk, moving closer. Not threatening exactly, but deliberate. "Which is why we need to establish some ground rules." Ground rules. "We're adults. We had a one-night encounter before we knew who each other was. It was—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "It was extraordinary. But it can't happen again, and we can't let it affect our professional relationship." Extraordinary. The word hung between them, a truth neither could deny. "So we just ignore it?" Tiffany asked. "We acknowledge it privately and move past it professionally." He stopped 2 feet away, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Different from what he'd worn at the gala, but equally expensive, equally devastating. "Can you do that?" She wanted to say yes, wanted to believe it was possible to compartmentalize that night, to lock it away in some mental box and carry on with her career. But looking at him now, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept dropping to her mouth despite his controlled words, she wondered if either of them was capable of that kind of discipline. "I need this job," she said quietly. "I worked incredibly hard to get here. I can't let one night, one mistake, destroy everything I've built." Something flickered across his face. "Is that what it was to you? A mistake? What else would you call it? A moment of honesty? A connection? Something real in a world that demands constant performance?" His voice dropped lower. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. About that night. About the way you looked at me without knowing who I was, without wanting anything except—" "Stop." Tiffany held up her hand. "You can't say things like that. We can't have this conversation." "Why?" "Because you're afraid you might agree. Because I have everything to lose and you have nothing at stake." The words came out harder than she intended, edged with the frustration and fear she'd been suppressing all week. "You're the CEO. You could sleep with half the company and face no consequences. But me? I'm a junior analyst. One whisper of impropriety and my credibility is destroyed. So yes, it was a mistake. It has to be a mistake, because anything else ruins my life." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Nicholas Sterling stood very still, his expression shifting through emotions too quick to name. Surprise, understanding, something that looked like regret. "You're right," he said finally. "I apologize. I wasn't thinking about the power differential, about what this situation means for you specifically." He stepped back, creating more distance between them. "That was selfish of me." Tiffany hadn't expected the apology, hadn't expected him to understand so quickly. It unsettled her almost as much as his earlier intensity had. "I want you to know," he continued, his tone shifting into something more formal, "that your position here is secure regardless of what did or didn't happen between us personally. Your work will be evaluated on its merits, You'll receive the same opportunities and challenges as any other analyst. What occurred at the Roosevelt Hotel will have zero impact on your professional trajectory. And if people find out, they won't. Not from me, and I doubt you're planning to share the details with colleagues. No, she admitted. I'm not. Then we agree. Professionally, we move forward as if we first met last Monday morning. Personally, we maintain appropriate boundaries. He moved back to his desk, putting furniture between them, re-establishing formality. Your analysis really was excellent, by the way. Not just saying that. Vivienne wants you on the acquisition due diligence team. It's a significant opportunity. You'd be working directly with senior management, presenting to the board, traveling to site visits. Tiffany's heart leaped despite everything. That kind of exposure, that level of responsibility would accelerate her career by years. I'd be honored. There's one complication. He met her eyes directly. I lead the acquisition committee. We'd be working closely together. Multiple meetings per week. Possibly some travel. Given the circumstances, I wanted to confirm you'd be comfortable with that before Vivienne makes it official. Oh, so this was the test. Could she handle being near him regularly? Could she maintain professionalism even when proximity would constantly remind them both of what they were trying to forget? Pride straightened her spine. I can handle it. You're certain? I'm here to build a career, Mr. Sterling, not to let one night of poor judgment derail that goal. If working with you advances my professional development, then yes, I'm absolutely certain. Something in his eyes might have been admiration or disappointment, or both. Then welcome to the acquisition team, Ms. Marshall. First meeting is Wednesday at 2. Margaret will send you the briefing materials. It was a dismissal, polite but clear. The conversation was over. They'd established their boundaries, agreed to their mutual pretense. Tiffany moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Mr. Sterling. Yes? That night. She didn't turn around, couldn't look at him while saying this. You asked if it was a mistake. The honest answer is, I don't know. It was impulsive and complicated and probably should never have happened, but it wasn't nothing. Nade. She left before he could respond, walking past Margaret with her professional smile intact, taking the elevator back down to her floor with her composure carefully maintained. Only when she reached the privacy of the women's restroom did she let herself lean against the cool tile wall, eyes closed, breathing hard. She'd done it, faced him, established boundaries, secured her position. She should feel relieved, triumphant even. Instead, she just felt empty, like she'd lost something she'd barely had time to recognize as precious. Her phone buzzed. An email from Margaret. Acquisition team briefing materials attached. Looking forward to working with you. M followed immediately by another email, this one from an unfamiliar internal address. No subject line, just 3 words. It wasn't nothing. Tiffany stared at the message, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. She should delete it. Should pretend she never saw it. Should absolutely not let those 3 words warm something deep inside her that had no business being warmed. Instead, she saved the email in a folder she titled Professional Development and went back to her desk, ready to prove that she could be exactly what she'd claimed. A woman focused solely on her career, undistracted by impossible attractions or beautiful complications, even if she had to lie to everyone else, and more dangerously, to herself. The acquisition due diligence consumed the next 3 weeks in a blur of financial models, market analysis, and strategic presentations. Tiffany discovered she had a talent for synthesizing complex data into clear narratives, for identifying risks others overlooked, for asking the questions that made senior executives pause and reconsider their assumptions. She also discovered that working closely with Nicholas Sterling was simultaneously the best and worst thing that had ever happened to her career. Best, because he was brilliant. Genuinely, frighteningly brilliant. He could look at a balance sheet and spot discrepancies within seconds, could analyze market trends with an intuition that bordered on prescient, could negotiate terms that left competitors wondering what had just happened. Watching him work was like watching a master pianist, every movement purposeful, every decision part of a larger composition only he could fully hear. Worst because proximity made forgetting impossible. Their meetings happened in conference rooms with glass walls, always with other team members present, always professional. But there were moments, brief, devastating moments, when their eyes would meet across a table and the air would thicken with memory. When he'd lean over her shoulder to review a document and she'd catch that cologne, feel the heat of his body inches from hers, and have to remind herself to breathe. When his hand would accidentally brush hers, passing papers and electricity would arc between them like a physical force. They never acknowledged it, never spoke about it, but the awareness hummed beneath every interaction like a current waiting to ground. "You're doing exceptional work," Vivian told her during a Friday check-in. "Mr. Sterling specifically mentioned your contribution to the risk assessment. That's high praise. He's not easily impressed." Tiffany murmured something appropriate, while internally wrestling with the complicated tangle of pride and frustration. She wanted to be recognized for her work, but every compliment from Nicholas felt weighted with subtext, with things unsaid. "Which brings me to the reason I wanted to speak with you." Vivian leaned forward, her expression shifting to something more confidential. "The acquisition target is based in Paris. We need to conduct on-site due diligence, tour the facilities, meet with their executive team, review physical operations. Mr. Sterling is leading a small team for a 4-day site visit next week. He's requested you be included." Paris, 4 days, with Nicholas Sterling. That's a tremendous opportunity," Tiffany managed. "It is. Frankly, including a junior analyst on international due diligence is unusual, but your work has been so strong that Mr. Sterling feels your presence would be valuable. The team will be small, just Mr. Sterling, Jonathan Reeves from legal, Samantha Kim from finance, and you. Very intimate, very intense. Are you comfortable with that?" Comfortable. What a laughable word. "Absolutely," Tiffany said, because what else could she say? Refusing would raise questions she couldn't answer. And professionally, this was huge, the kind of exposure that typically took years to earn. "Excellent. Margaret will send you the travel details. Business class flights, 5-star hotel, all expenses covered. Try to enjoy it a little. Paris in autumn is magical." After Vivian left, Tiffany sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen without seeing it. Paris. The most romantic city in the world. 4 days in close quarters with the one man she was supposed to be forgetting. Her phone buzzed with a text from Simone. "Drinks tonight? You've been dodging me for weeks and I'm staging an intervention." Tiffany hesitated, then typed back, "My place 7. Bring wine. I need to tell you something." "You slept with your boss?" Simone's voice hit a register that probably disturbed dogs 3 blocks away. She was sitting on Tiffany's couch, wine glass frozen halfway to her mouth, eyes wide with shock. "Your CEO boss? Nicholas Sterling boss?" "He wasn't my boss when it happened," Tiffany defended weakly. "I didn't know who he was. It was anonymous. The masks." "Oh my God." Simone set down her wine, pressed her hands to her face. "Oh my God, I don't even know what this is. A romance novel, a disaster, both. It's a mess." Tiffany poured herself more wine, needing the fortification. "And it's getting messier because now I have to go to Paris with him next week." Paris. With the man whose Simone gestured vaguely, whose everything you know intimately. Paris, the literal city of love and romance, and... She stopped, studying Tiffany more carefully. Wait, you're terrified. Why are you terrified? Is he pressuring you? Because if he's using his position to... No, Tiffany cut in quickly. No, nothing like that. He's been completely professional. Almost aggressively professional. We established boundaries. We agreed it was a one-time thing that shouldn't affect our working relationship, but I can't stop thinking about him. The admission felt like releasing a pressure valve. Not just physically, though. God, Simone, that night was... She stopped, shook her head. But it's more than that. When we're in meetings, when he's analyzing problems or making decisions, I see this brilliance, this intensity, this passion for what he does. And I remember how he was that night, vulnerable, honest, real, like he'd taken off more than just a mask. And I want... She couldn't finish, couldn't articulate the dangerous wanting that grew stronger every day, despite her best efforts to suppress it. You want him, Simone said quietly. Not just physically, you want all of it. I can't want him. The power differential alone makes it impossible, never mind the professional implications. If anyone found out, my reputation would be destroyed. I'd be the woman who slept her way into opportunities, never mind that I earned them. Every accomplishment would be tainted. What does he want? Tiffany remembered that email. It wasn't nothing, and the way he sometimes looked at her when he thought she wasn't noticing. I think he wants the same thing I do, which makes it worse, not better. Simone sipped her wine thoughtfully. So, you're going to Paris, where you'll be in close quarters, probably working late nights, definitely experiencing one of the most romantic cities on earth. And you're both pretending you don't want each other, while the sexual tension builds to explosive levels. That's the plan. That's a terrible plan. You have a better one? Simone considered. You could quit. Start over somewhere else. I'm not going to let one night, no matter how incredible, derail my career. I worked too hard to get here. You could tell HR, request reassignment. And say what? I slept with the CEO before I started working here and now it's awkward? That conversation ends with me unemployed and possibly blacklisted. You could sleep with him again, get it out of your system. Simone, I'm just saying, maybe all this tension exists because it was interrupted. One night isn't enough to resolve that kind of chemistry. Maybe if you actually explored it, the mystery would fade, and you could both move on. Tiffany wanted to dismiss the idea immediately, but a treacherous part of her brain latched onto it, turned it over, examined it from multiple angles. That's insane. That would make everything worse. Would it, though? You're both consenting adults. You're already struggling to maintain boundaries. At least if you acknowledged what's happening, you wouldn't be torturing yourselves with pretense. Oh, the power differential is real and problematic, yes, but you're not reporting directly to him. You're not asking for special treatment. If two people genuinely want each other, and they're careful about how they handle it professionally, who's really harmed? Everyone who would assume I'm trading sex for career advancement. Simone didn't have an answer for that, because there wasn't a good one. The double standard was real. Men could have affairs without destroying their professional credibility, but women were held to different standards, judged more harshly, their competence questioned. So you suffer in silence, Simone said finally. Maintain your boundaries. Go to Paris and pretend you don't want to tear his clothes off. Exactly. That's still a terrible plan. It's the only plan I have. The flight to Paris departed Sunday evening. Tiffany arrived at JFK to find the sterling global team already assembled at the first-class lounge. Jonathan Reeves, a sharp-featured lawyer in his 40s. Samantha Kim, a finance director with a reputation for ruthless precision. And Nicholas Sterling himself, looking unfairly attractive in dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Ms. Marshall. He greeted her with professional courtesy, nothing in his tone suggesting they were anything other than colleagues. Good to see you. Have you met Jonathan and Samantha? The introductions were smooth, professional. Samantha assessed Tiffany with the kind of thorough evaluation that suggested she was already cataloguing strengths and weaknesses. Jonathan was warmer, immediately launching into questions about her background and analysis approach. They boarded together, Tiffany intensely aware of Nicholas's presence several rows ahead in the business-class cabin. She'd been assigned a window seat, grateful for the privacy to collect her thoughts during the 7-hour flight. Except an hour into the flight, after the meal service had concluded and most passengers had dimmed their reading lights, Nicholas appeared beside her row. "May I?" He gestured to the empty aisle seat. Her heart kicked into overdrive. "Shouldn't you be enjoying your first-class suite?" "Can't sleep. Thought I'd review some documents and the light was bothering my seatmate." It was a plausible excuse, delivered smoothly. "Unless you'd prefer privacy?" She should say yes, should maintain distance, should not allow herself to be alone with him in the semi-darkness of a night flight over the Atlantic. "It's fine," she heard herself say. He settled into the seat, close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. He pulled out a tablet, ostensibly reviewing documents, but after several minutes of silence, he spoke quietly. "Are you nervous? About Paris? About the work? No, I'm prepared. That's not what I asked." Tiffany turned to look at him. In the dim cabin light, his face was all angles and shadows, his grey eyes darker than usual. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," he admitted. "Because I promised myself I'd maintain professional boundaries, and then the universe arranges for us to spend 4 days in the most romantic city on earth. We're there for work." "I know. But work ends at some point each day, and then we're just 2 people in Paris, trying very hard to pretend we don't remember what it felt like when pretense wasn't necessary. Nicholas—" His first name slipped out before she could stop it. "I know. I know all the reasons this is complicated. But can I tell you something I've learned in 15 years of building this company?" He set aside his tablet, giving her his full attention. "The most successful ventures are the ones where you acknowledge risk honestly, rather than pretending it doesn't exist. You assess it, plan for it, manage it. You don't ignore it and hope for the best." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop pretending there's nothing between us. We acknowledge it exists. We agree on clear parameters, professional during work hours, discreet in all circumstances, consensual and honest in any personal interaction. We're adults. We can handle complexity without letting it destroy what we've both worked for." Tiffany's breath caught. "You're talking about an affair. I'm talking about honesty. About not torturing ourselves with denial when we could be exploring something that clearly matters to both of us. And when it ends badly, when office rumors start, when my credibility is destroyed. Why assume it ends badly? Why assume anyone needs to know?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Tiffany, I haven't looked at another woman since that night. Haven't wanted to. You're the last thing I think about before sleeping and the first thought when I wake up. I see you in meetings and remember how you looked with moonlight on your skin, how you felt in my arms, how you laughed, actually laughed, when I tried to cook you breakfast the next morning and burned the toast." She blinked. "I left before morning. You left while I was sleeping, but I woke up about 20 minutes later, found you gone, saw my business card on the floor and knew you'd figured out who I was." His smile was rueful. "Spent the rest of the weekend wondering if you'd show up Monday or run very far in the opposite direction." You burned toast? Extremely badly. Set off the smoke alarm. I'm a competent CEO, but a disaster in the kitchen. He studied her face. You left because you were scared. I understand that. But you also came back Monday. You didn't quit. You didn't request reassignment. You faced it head-on, which tells me you're braver than you think you are. Or more stubborn. That too. His hand moved, hesitated, then gently covered hers on the armrest. I'm not asking for an answer now, just asking you to think about it. 4 days in Paris. We'll work hard, impress the hell out of the acquisition target, secure this deal. And when work is done, if you want to explore what's between us, really explore it, not just pretend it doesn't exist. I'll be waiting. He stood then, returned to his first-class seat, leaving Tiffany alone with her racing thoughts and the phantom warmth of his hand on hers. She didn't sleep for the rest of the flight. Paris welcomed them with grey skies and cool October wind. The city dressed in autumn colours that ranged from gold to rust to deep crimson. Their hotel was in the 8th arrondissement, a 5-star establishment with Belle Époque architecture and rooms that overlooked tree-lined boulevards. Tiffany's room was elegant. High ceilings, antique furniture, a marble bathroom, and a balcony that offered views of distant rooftops and the top of the Eiffel Tower. It was beautiful and lonely, and she stood at the window for long moments, wondering what she was doing, what she was risking, what she might be about to choose. Their first meeting with the acquisition target began Monday morning. The company was a tech firm specializing in sustainable energy solutions, founded by a charismatic French entrepreneur named Pierre Mercier. His offices occupied a converted warehouse in the Marais, all exposed brick and cutting-edge technology. The due diligence was intense. Tiffany spent the day reviewing technical specifications, interviewing department heads, analyzing operational efficiency. Nicolas led the discussions with Pierre, his French flawless and his strategic questions incisive. She watched him command the room and felt that dangerous attraction intensify. This was his element, this brilliant negotiation dance, and he was magnificent at it. By evening, they'd accomplished more than expected. Pierre invited them to dinner at a small bistro near Notre Dame, and the team accepted gratefully. The restaurant was intimate, candlelit, serving traditional French cuisine that melted on the tongue. Wine flowed freely, conversations shifted from business to personal, and Tiffany found herself genuinely enjoying Jonathan's dry humor and Samantha's surprising passion for French cinema. Nicholas sat across from her, participating in the conversation, but watching her with an attention that made her hyper-aware of every gesture, every smile, every time she laughed at Jonathan's stories. After dinner, Pierre departed. Jonathan claimed exhaustion, and Samantha decided to explore the neighborhood, which left Tiffany and Nicholas standing on a cobblestone street near the Seine, the river glittering with reflected lights, Notre Dame's facade illuminated in the distance. "Walk with me?" Nicholas asked. She should say no, should return to the hotel, should maintain the boundaries they'd supposedly established. "Just a walk," she said. They strolled along the river, maintaining careful distance, two colleagues taking in the sights after a successful day. Except everything felt charged. The cool air, the sound of water lapping against stone embankments, the occasional couples passing them hand in hand. "My mother was French," Nicholas said suddenly. "She died when I was 12, but she'd bring me to Paris every summer, teach me the language, show me the museums, tell me stories about art and history and beauty. She said Paris was proof that humans could create magic when they cared enough." "I'm sorry about your mother. It was a long time ago. But Paris always feels like visiting her somehow, like she's still here in the architecture and the light and the way the city refuses to rush." Tiffany looked at him, really looked, and saw past the CEO, past the powerful exterior, to the boy who'd lost his mother too young, who'd built an empire, maybe trying to prove something to a woman who couldn't see it. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said quietly, "for including me on this team. I know it's complicated, but professionally, this is everything I've worked for. You earned it. Your analysis, your insights, they're legitimately valuable. I didn't include you because of what happened between us. I included you despite it because you're that good. That's important for me to hear." They'd stopped walking, standing now on Pont Neuf, the oldest bridge in Paris. The city spread around them, ancient and beautiful and utterly indifferent to their personal drama. Nicholas turned to face her fully. "What are you thinking? Right now, in this moment, what do you actually want?" "That's not fair." "Why?" "Because what I want and what I should do are entirely different things." "Tell me what you want. Just for tonight. Forget should, forget consequences, forget everything except honest truth. What do you want, Tiffany?" The question hung between them, demanding, offering, terrifying in its simplicity. And Tiffany, standing on a bridge in Paris with a man who terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, decided that maybe, just maybe, Simone had been right. Maybe pretense was more dangerous than honesty. Maybe denying what they both felt was causing more damage than acknowledging it ever could. "I want to stop pretending," she whispered. "I want to stop lying to myself about what I feel every time I'm near you. I want—" She stopped, gathered courage. "I want to know if that night was real or if I invented the connection because the masks made it safe to feel something I'm usually too careful to allow." Nicholas stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "It was real. Every moment was real, and I've spent 5 weeks trying to convince myself I imagined how incredible it felt. But I can't. Because every time I see you, every time you speak in meetings or challenge my assumptions or bite your lip when you're concentrating, I remember, and I want more. This could destroy everything. Or it could be the beginning of something extraordinary." His hand rose slowly, giving her time to step back, to refuse. When she didn't move, his fingers traced her jaw with devastating gentleness. "Let me take you to dinner tomorrow night. A real dinner, not a business meal. Just us, exploring Paris, seeing where this goes. And if it's a disaster, then at least we'll know. At least we won't spend the rest of our lives wondering what if." His thumb brushed over her lower lip. "One dinner. Your choice." Tiffany knew she should refuse, knew every logical reason this was dangerous. But standing there with Paris glittering around them and possibility shimmering in the air, she couldn't remember why safety had ever seemed more important than truth. "One dinner," she agreed, and watched something bright and fierce flare in his grey eyes before he stepped back, creating proper distance once more. They walked back to the hotel in charged silence, parted in the lobby with professional goodnights, rode separate elevators to their floors. But as Tiffany prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Eyes bright, cheeks flushed, looking more alive than she'd felt in years. Tomorrow night, she'd have dinner with Nicholas Sterling. Not her boss, not the CEO, just the man who'd made her feel beautiful and wanted and brave enough to want something more than just safety. Whatever happened next, at least she'd chosen it honestly. And somehow, that felt like its own kind of victory. Tuesday's due diligence consumed 12 hours, all business, all focus. But underneath the professional performance, anticipation hummed through Tiffany's bloodstream like champagne bubbles, knowing that tonight everything would change. Nicholas had texted her during a brief afternoon break, 8 o'clock, wear something comfortable for walking, trust me. She'd brought limited options for non-business wear, but among her clothes hung a simple black dress, elegant, understated, with a neckline that hinted without revealing. She paired it with a burgundy leather jacket and low heels, studying herself critically in the mirror. Professional enough to maintain dignity, attractive enough to show she'd made an effort. At precisely 8 o'clock, She descended to the hotel lobby. Nicholas waited near the entrance, looking unfairly devastating in dark jeans and a charcoal jacket over a black shirt. When he saw her, his expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something that looked like wonder. "You're stunning," he said simply. "You clean up acceptably yourself." His laugh was warm, genuine. "Acceptably, I'll take it." He offered his arm. "Ready for an adventure?" They walked through the 8th arrondissement as dusk settled over the city, the streetlights flickering to life one by one. Nicholas guided them through narrow streets and unexpected courtyards, clearly familiar with Paris's hidden geography. "Where are we going?" Tiffany asked. "Somewhere tourists don't typically find. A restaurant my mother loved. They don't advertise, don't have a website, just incredible food and locals who've been coming for 30 years. The restaurant was tucked down an alley in the 6th arrondissement, marked only by a small brass plaque. Inside, it was intimate. Maybe 10 tables, exposed stone walls, candlelight, and the scent of herbs and butter and garlic that made Tiffany's mouth water instantly. An older woman approached, her face lighting up when she saw Nicholas. They exchanged rapid French, embracing like family, before she turned to Tiffany with warm assessment. "Bienvenue, mademoiselle. Any friend of Nicholas is treasured here. I am Colette." They were seated at a corner table, private and romantic, with wine appearing almost immediately, a burgundy that tasted like velvet and smoke. "Colette knew my mother," Nicholas explained. "She worked here as a waitress when they were both young. They stayed friends for 20 years. After my mother died, Colette and her husband would invite me for dinner whenever I visited Paris. Their chosen family, I suppose." "That's beautiful. They're good people, and they serve the best coq au vin in Paris, which we're about to experience." The meal was extraordinary, course after course of perfectly prepared French classics, each bite a revelation. They talked through dinner, really talked, about everything and nothing. Nicholas shared stories about building Sterling Global from a startup to an empire, about the mistakes he'd made, the lessons learned the hard way. Tiffany found herself opening up about her childhood in Brooklyn, about her father who'd worked 3 jobs to send her to private school, about the scholarship to Columbia that had changed her trajectory. "He must be incredibly proud of you," Nicholas said. "He died my senior year of college, heart attack at work." The old grief still ached, but time had softened its edges. "But yes, I think he would have been proud. He always said education was the only thing no one could take from me." Nicholas's hand covered hers on the table. "I'm sorry, that's a profound loss. It made me determined to prove his sacrifices weren't wasted, to build something that honored what he gave me." She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. "Which is why this job, this opportunity, it matters so much. I'm not just building a career, I'm completing his dream. And I'm the complication that threatens that." "You're not a complication. You're—" She struggled for the right word. "You're unexpected, and maybe that's not the same thing." They lingered over dessert and coffee, the restaurant gradually emptying around them until they were among the last guests. Colette approached with a knowing smile, pressing Nicholas's cheek affectionately and whispering something in French that made him laugh. Outside, the November air had turned properly cold. Nicholas shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over Tiffany's shoulders without asking, the gesture so naturally protective it made her chest tight. "Walk?" he suggested. They wandered through the Latin Quarter, through streets where students and artists had argued about philosophy and revolution for centuries. Nicholas pointed out bookshops and cafes, sharing stories and history, his hand eventually finding hers and staying there. "Can I ask you something?" Tiffany said as they crossed through an empty plaza, their footsteps echoing on cobblestones. "That night at the gala, why did you approach me? There were hundreds of women there, probably many who would have been easier choices. Nicholas was quiet for a moment. You looked lost, but not in a helpless way. More like you were standing at a crossroad, trying to decide which path to take. And there was something in the way you carried yourself. Elegant, but not affected. Uncertain, but not weak. You looked real in a room full of performance. He stopped walking, turned to face her, and when you looked back at me, when our eyes met across that ballroom, I felt something I haven't felt in years, maybe ever. What did you feel? Possibility. Like my very carefully controlled life had just cracked open and shown me something I didn't know I was missing. Tiffany's breath caught. I felt it too. That's what scared me so badly when I realized who you were. Because it wasn't just physical attraction, it was this sense of recognition, like I'd been waiting for you without knowing it. And now? His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. Now that we're here, being honest, what do you feel? Terrified, exhilarated, like I'm about to make either the best or worst decision of my life. What if it's both? What if the best things are always a little terrifying? Then he kissed her, and thought became impossible. It was different from their first kiss in that hotel elevator, less desperate, more deliberate. He kissed her like they had all the time in the world, like he wanted to memorize every angle and texture, like she was something precious he'd been given permission to treasure. His hands slid into her hair, and she pressed closer, feeling the solid warmth of his body, tasting wine and coffee and desire on his lips. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tiffany rested her forehead against his chest, feeling his heart thunder against her cheek. "Come back to my room," he whispered against her hair. I just want more time with you. Want to keep talking. Keep learning about you, want to fall asleep with you in my arms and wake up knowing you're still there. Every sensible objection rose in her mind, the risk, the complications, the professional implications. But underneath all of it, one truth sang louder. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to choose something for herself that had nothing to do with career strategy or calculated risk management. "Yes," she said simply. They took a taxi back to the hotel, sitting pressed together in the back seat, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. In the lobby, they encountered Samantha Kim stepping out of the elevator, her eyebrows rising slightly at seeing them together. "Good evening," Nicholas said smoothly, his tone perfectly professional despite his arms still around Tiffany. "Enjoy your dinner?" "Very much. You two as well, apparently." Samantha's expression was unreadable. "See you tomorrow morning." After she walked away, Tiffany turned worried eyes to Nicholas. She knows. She suspects. That's different. She'll tell others. Maybe. Or maybe she'll mind her own business. He guided her toward the elevators. "Tiffany, I can't promise this will be simple. Can't promise there won't be gossip or speculation. But I can promise I'll be honest with you, respectful of your career, and completely committed to making sure your work is evaluated fairly regardless of our personal connection." In his suite, 3 times the size of hers, with panoramic windows and elegant furnishings, they gravitated to the sofa overlooking the city. Paris glittered below them, beautiful and indifferent, as they sat close together, his arm around her, her head on his shoulder. "Tell me something nobody else knows about you," Nicholas said. "I'm terrified of failing. Not just normal fear, paralyzing terror that I'll prove every doubt right, that I don't actually belong in rooms like Sterling Global's conference rooms, that eventually someone will notice I'm faking competence. Imposter syndrome, probably. But knowing the name doesn't make it less real." She turned to look up at him. "Your turn. Something nobody knows. I'm lonely. Have been for years. Built this massive company, have hundreds of employees, sit in meetings with powerful people every day. But actual connection, genuine intimacy, I haven't had that since." He paused. Maybe ever. That night with you was the first time in my adult life I felt truly seen, not as a CEO or a business strategist or a wealthy prospect, just as a man. Oh, Nicholas, I know it's heavy, sorry. You asked for truth. Don't apologize. She shifted, straddling his lap to face him directly, her hands framing his face. I see you, not just the CEO. I see the man who burns toast and remembers his mother's favorite restaurant and admits when he's scared. And I... She stopped, swallowed. I'm falling for you. Probably was from that first night. And it terrifies me because wanting you means risking everything I've built. But I'm tired of choosing safety over honesty. His kiss this time was deeper, hungrier, carrying the weight of admission and relief. They lost themselves in it, in the feel and taste of each other, hands exploring with new permission, restraint dissolving under the force of mutual desire. When they finally moved to the bedroom, it was with the same intense connection they'd shared before, but layered now with deeper knowing, with names and history and the vulnerability of emotional honesty. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his hands and mouth worshipping every revealed inch of skin. She matched his pace, learning the planes and angles of his body with touch and taste, and whispered appreciation. Making love this time felt different, not anonymous and desperate, but intimate and deliberate. They took their time, exploring what pleased each other, communicating in touches and sighs and breathless encouragement. And when they finally came together, it was with an intensity that transcended physical pleasure, becoming something deeper, more essential. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her back. Stay, he murmured. Don't leave this time. I'm not going anywhere. They slept wrapped in each other, and when Tiffany woke hours later to soft morning light filtering through the curtains, Nicholas was still there, still holding her, his sleeping face peaceful and unguarded. She should feel regret or panic, should be calculating the professional implications. Instead, she just felt happy, genuinely, unexpectedly happy in a way that had nothing to do with career advancement or strategic planning, and everything to do with the man breathing softly beside her. The phone rang at 7:30, a harsh interruption that sent them both scrambling for consciousness. Nicholas answered, his voice rough with sleep, then gradually sharpening as he processed whatever he was hearing. When? Pause. I understand. We'll be there in 45 minutes. He hung up, turning to Tiffany with an expression gone serious. That was Pierre Mercier. There's been a complication with the acquisition. A competing offer came in overnight, substantially higher than ours. He wants to meet immediately to discuss options. Reality crashed back with devastating efficiency. They dressed quickly, professionally, transforming from lovers to colleagues in minutes. In the taxi to Pierre's offices, they maintained careful distance, their night together locked away behind appropriate corporate demeanors. The meeting was tense. Pierre explained apologetically that a German conglomerate had made an aggressive offer, 20% above Sterling Global's bid, with faster closing terms. I wanted to give you the opportunity to counter, Pierre said, addressing Nicholas directly. Your company feels like a better cultural fit, but the numbers? Nicholas listened carefully, asked strategic questions, and then requested a private consultation with his team. In the conference room they'd been assigned, the 4 Sterling Global representatives gathered around the table. Samantha immediately launched into financial analysis. Jonathan outlined legal concerns, and Tiffany found herself building a competitive assessment, even while her personal life felt like it was fracturing around the edges. Your thoughts, Tiffany? Nicholas asked, his tone perfectly professional, betraying nothing of what they'd shared hours earlier. She focused, pushed aside everything except the problem at hand. The German offer is aggressive, but it's also potentially vulnerable. Their integration record with French companies is poor. 3 acquisitions in the past 5 years, 2 resulted in massive executive turnover and culture clashes. If we can convince Pierre that our offer represents better long-term stability for his team and vision, the price difference becomes less critical. Nicholas's eyes flickered with something that might have been pride or appreciation before returning to neutral assessment. Elaborate, she did, building a presentation on the whiteboard about culture fit, long-term value, employee retention. Samantha added financial projections, Jonathan contributed contractual protections, and within 90 minutes they'd built a compelling counter-narrative. The rest of the day was pure business intensity, negotiations, number crunching, strategic discussions that stretched past midnight. By the time they reached an agreement, Sterling Global securing the acquisition with a revised offer that split the difference on price while emphasizing culture and vision, everyone was exhausted. "Drinks to celebrate?" Samantha suggested as they left Pierre's offices near 2 in the morning. "Rain check," Nicholas said. "I think we've all earned a decent night's sleep before our flight tomorrow." In the taxi back to the hotel, the 4 of them were quiet, processing victory and exhaustion. The hotel lobby was deserted at 2:30 in the morning, the marble floors gleaming under dim lighting, the night staff moving with quiet efficiency. Tiffany stood near the elevators with her colleagues, exhaustion pulling at every muscle, adrenaline from the successful negotiation still buzzing faintly through her bloodstream. "Excellent work, everyone," Nicholas said, his CEO voice firmly in place despite the late hour. "Tiffany, your culture fit analysis was the turning point. Pierre responded to that narrative more than any financial projection. Well done." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." She kept her tone professional, aware of Jonathan and Samantha listening, aware of how easily their night together could become tomorrow's office gossip if she showed even a flicker of the intimacy they'd shared. Samantha's eyes moved between them with sharp assessment before she pressed the elevator call button. "I'm dead on my feet. See you all at breakfast before we head to the airport." The elevator arrived. Jonathan and Samantha stepped inside, but Nicholas hesitated, his hand on the door to prevent it from closing. "Ms. Marshall, could I have a word? Just a quick debrief about tomorrow's presentation to the board." Tiffany's pulse jumped. Samantha's eyebrow rose fractionally, but she said nothing as the elevator doors closed, leaving Tiffany and Nicholas alone in the silent lobby. He turned to face her, and she saw exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes, tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there during negotiations. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her. "Come upstairs, please. We need to talk about what happens next." "Nicholas, not about last night, about how we handle this professionally, about protecting your career and reputation." His jaw tightened. "About making sure I don't destroy everything you've worked for, because I can't stop wanting you." The raw honesty in his words made her chest ache. She glanced around the empty lobby, calculating risks, then nodded once. His suite was exactly as they'd left it that morning. Rumpled sheets visible through the open bedroom door, her scarf still draped over a chair, evidence of the intimacy they'd shared before business had reclaimed them. Tiffany moved to the windows, putting distance between them, needing space to think clearly. "Samantha knows," she said without preamble. "She saw us together last night, and today during negotiations, she watched us. She's smart enough to connect the pieces." "I know." Nicholas poured water from the minibar, handed her a glass. "Which means we need to decide how to handle this before we're back in New York. Before speculation becomes gossip, becomes a problem neither of us can control." "There's no we to handle," Tiffany said, the words tasting bitter even as she forced them out. There's me, a junior analyst whose credibility will be questioned the moment anyone suspects I'm sleeping with the CEO. And there's you, a powerful man who will face minimal consequences regardless of what happens between us. That's not fair. It doesn't have to be fair to be true. She set down the water glass, her hands trembling slightly. I've spent the last 36 hours in this beautiful fantasy where I could have both. The career I've sacrificed for, and whatever this is between us. But we both know that's not how the world works. Not for women, not for me. Nicholas moved closer, but didn't touch her. So, what are you saying? I'm saying that when we return to New York, we go back to being what we were before Paris. Professional colleagues, nothing more. You can't possibly believe that's sustainable. It has to be. Tiffany turned to face him fully, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, because the alternative is watching everything I've built crumble while people whisper that I earned my opportunities on my back instead of through my work. And I won't survive that. My father didn't work himself to death so I could become someone's office scandal. The pain that flashed across Nicholas's face almost broke her resolve. He looked like she'd struck him, like her words had found every vulnerable place he'd exposed the night before, and driven straight through them. Is that what you think this is? A scandal? Some cheap office affair? It doesn't matter what I think it is. It matters what everyone else will believe. Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. You told me my work would be evaluated fairly regardless of our personal connection. But we both know that's naive. Every promotion, every opportunity, every success I have from this point forward will be tainted if people know about us. Then we'll be discreet. We'll establish clear professional boundaries, separate our personal and professional lives completely. There is no separating them. The words burst out louder than intended. You're the CEO. I'm a junior analyst. Every interaction we have is colored by that power differential. Every meeting, every project, every time you praise my work or critique my analysis, people will wonder if it's based on merit or on what happens when the office empties and the lights go down. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything being said and everything being left unspoken. Through the windows, Paris glittered with indifferent beauty, a city that had witnessed countless love affairs begin and end, that would continue spinning long after their particular drama concluded. I love you, Nicholas said quietly. I know it's too soon, I know it's complicated, but I need you to hear that before you walk out this door. What I feel for you isn't casual or convenient or about power. It's terrifying and consuming, and it makes me want to be better than I've ever been. And if you're asking me to pretend none of that exists, to sit in meetings with you and pretend my heart doesn't stop every time you walk into a room, I don't know if I can do that. Tiffany felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. You'll have to. Because I can't love you and keep my dignity. I can't choose you and still respect myself. And right now, my self-respect is the only thing I have that's completely mine, that no one gave me and no one can take away. I would never ask you to sacrifice your dignity. You're asking me to risk everything I am for the possibility of what we might be. And maybe that's romantic to you. But to me, it's just another version of the same deal women have been offered forever. Give up your power, your independence, your professional credibility, and maybe you'll get love in return. Maybe. She moved toward the door, her decision made even as her heart screamed in protest. I won't make that trade. Not even for you. Nicholas didn't try to stop her, but his voice followed her to the door. What if you're wrong? What if walking away from this is the bigger mistake? She paused, her hand on the doorknob, and allowed herself one final moment of honesty. Then I'll survive that mistake the same way I've survived everything else. By working harder, by proving myself over and over, by refusing to let anyone define my worth except me. She turned to look at him one last time. I hope someday you understand that choosing myself isn't the same as rejecting you. It's just me finally being brave enough to want more than I've been told I deserve." In her own room, Tiffany stood under the shower until the water ran cold, washing away traces of him, of them, of the brief and beautiful possibility that had flickered to life in Paris before reality extinguished it. She packed methodically, folding the dress she'd worn to dinner, tucking away the memories with the same ruthless efficiency. By morning, she'd rebuilt her armor. The flight back to New York was professionally cordial. They reviewed the acquisition documents, discussed presentation strategies for the board meeting, maintained perfect colleague distance. If Jonathan and Samantha noticed the careful space Tiffany and Nicholas maintained, the way they never quite made eye contact, the formal Mr. Sterling and Ms. Marshall replacing the easier intimacy of Paris, they had the grace not to comment. Back at Sterling Global's headquarters, Tiffany threw herself into work with ferocious intensity. She arrived before dawn, stayed past midnight, volunteered for every challenging project, produced analysis that made senior executives pause and reconsider their assumptions. Within 3 months, Vivian recommended her for early promotion. Within 6 months, she was leading her own acquisition team. And through it all, Nicholas Sterling maintained exactly the professional distance she'd demanded. He praised her work in meetings without favoritism, critiqued her presentations with the same rigor he applied to everyone, treated her with impeccable corporate respect that betrayed nothing of what they'd shared in Paris. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like slow starvation, wanting something desperately while watching it remain just out of reach, close enough to see but too dangerous to touch. She dated occasionally, nice men from her MBA networking group, colleagues from other divisions, friends of Simone who were stable and appropriate and completely incapable of making her feel even a fraction of what Nicholas Sterling had ignited with a single glance across a masquerade ballroom. "You're punishing yourself," Simone said over drinks one evening, nearly 8 months after Paris. "You proved your point. You've demonstrated that your success has nothing to do with him. So why are you still torturing yourself with this nobility routine?" "It's not nobility, it's survival. It's fear." Simone's eyes were gentle but uncompromising. "You're so afraid of being judged, so terrified of anyone thinking you needed help climbing the ladder, that you've locked yourself away from the one person who actually sees you. He's my CEO. He's a man who loves you, who spent 8 months respecting your boundaries while watching you work yourself to exhaustion, who could have anyone but wants you specifically. And you're throwing that away because of what other people might think. You don't understand what it's like being a woman in corporate America, being black in these spaces, having to be twice as good to get half the recognition." "I understand perfectly," Simone cut in quietly. "I live that reality too. But I also understand that sometimes the most radical act of empowerment is choosing what you want instead of choosing what's safest. Is letting fear make your decisions really the example of strength you want to model?" The words haunted Tiffany through the following weeks, particularly during the annual shareholders meeting when Nicholas presented the year's acquisitions, including the Paris deal, and specifically credited her analysis as instrumental to their success. She watched him command that room of hundreds, brilliant and powerful and completely professional, and felt the truth settle into her bones. She hadn't been protecting herself by pushing him away. She'd been protecting the version of herself that was too afraid to want more than safety. After the meeting, she found him in his office, jacket discarded, tie loosened, reviewing documents in the late afternoon light. "Do you have a minute?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face before he schooled it to neutrality. "Of course, close the door." She did, then stood there gathering courage while he watched with patient attention. "I was wrong," she said finally. "In Paris, when I told you that choosing you meant sacrificing my dignity, I was wrong. Nicholas set down his pen, but said nothing, letting her continue. I thought protecting my career meant denying what I felt. I thought proving my competence required erasing any hint of vulnerability or desire or need. But I've spent 8 months being exactly the professional I thought I needed to be, and I've been miserable. Not because my work isn't good, it is. Not because I haven't earned everything I've achieved, I have, but because I've been so busy proving I don't need anyone that I forgot what it feels like to want something just for myself, to want someone. Tiffany, let me finish. She moved closer, her heart pounding but her voice steady. I can't promise this will be simple. Can't promise there won't be gossip or speculation or people who'll assume I've used our relationship for advancement. But I can promise I'll never let anyone, including you, diminish my accomplishments or question my competence. And I can promise that if we do this, we do it as equals. Not boss and subordinate, not CEO and analyst, just two people choosing each other honestly. Nicholas stood slowly, moving around his desk until he stood directly in front of her. What changed? 8 months of perfect professional distance, and suddenly, I realized that spending my life afraid of what people might think isn't strength. It's just a different kind of prison. She met his eyes directly, and I'd rather be judged for choosing what I want than praised for accepting less than I deserve. His hand rose slowly, fingers brushing her cheek with the tenderness she'd tried so hard to forget. I never stopped wanting you. Never stopped hoping you'd realize that what we have is worth the risk. I know. I could see it every time you looked at me, every time you carefully maintained that professional distance I demanded. You respected my boundaries, even when it clearly cost you. And that... She leaned into his touch. That's what finally made me brave enough to stop hiding. As when he kissed her, it felt like coming home and stepping into the unknown simultaneously, familiar and thrilling, safe and terrifying, exactly what she'd been missing without allowing herself to acknowledge the loss. People will talk, he murmured against her mouth. Let them. I know what I've earned. The board might object. Then we'll navigate it. Together. I love you. He pulled back just enough to see her face. I need you to know that before we do this. This isn't about convenience or attraction. It's about wanting to build something real with someone who challenges me and inspires me and refuses to settle for anything less than honesty. I love you too, Tiffany said, and felt the truth of it settle through her like sunlight breaking through clouds, even when I was trying not to, even when it scared me, even when it seemed impossible. They stood together in his office as the city darkened around them, two people who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other with intention, ready to face whatever came next, not because it would be easy, but because some things were worth fighting for. And Tiffany Marshall, who'd spent her entire life proving she was strong enough to stand alone, had finally learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let someone stand beside you. Not behind you, not supporting you from below, beside you as an equal, as a partner, as someone who saw your strength and matched it with their own. That night they left the office together, hand in hand, and if anyone noticed, if anyone whispered, if anyone questioned, well, Tiffany had spent her whole life answering questions. She'd spend the rest of it proving that she could build an extraordinary career and choose an extraordinary love without sacrificing either, because she deserved both. And finally, beautifully, she believed it.